Hello, Diolch yn fawr. My name is Charlotte Frances Burton. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I am honored to be giving the 2025 Richard Burton Lecture here at Swansea University. Richard is my maternal grandfather with my grandmother, Sybil Williams, through my mom, Kate, who married my dad, Michael Ritchie. I have started participating more in Richard's legacy the past few years, which has led me to using the Burton name instead of my birth name, Charlotte Ritchie, for a few reasons. Most notably and most importantly, there is a brilliant English actress named Charlotte Ritchie. Earlier in her career, there was a Google glitch that, because of our same first and last name, caused her photo to show up as Grandpa's granddaughter. She would frequently be asked about it in interviews what it was like to be Richard Burton's granddaughter, which I'm sure at first was deeply confusing and I'm sure also very irritating. Her Twitter bio for a while was, "I am not Richard Burton's granddaughter." So I just want to kick off this lecture by saying, Charlotte Ritchie, I'm so sorry, girl, my bad. I'm using the big man's name now, so we shouldn't have this issue anymore. And before you ask, my dad, Michael Ritchie, has been very supportive of this decision, and I thank him deeply for that. 2025 is the centenary year of Richard's birth, and it's been very overwhelming and exciting to see all the international plans in Grandpa Rich's memory. Today, I will be recounting some of my childhood familial memories, dissecting my grandfather's career on stage and on film, and analyzing his influence on pop culture. I chose this title for a few reasons. First, I wanted to do a callback to my mom's lecture from 2 years ago. Second, a favorite book of mine, How to Build a Girl by Caitlin Moran. This story within it reminds me both of my grandparents and their journeys of leaving home and pursuing art. I also thought I should have some personal literary reference since books were the cornerstone and a true lifeline to my grandparents' childhood. Grandpa Rich was born in Pontrhydyfen, Wales in 1925 and died in 1984. My grandmother Sybil was born in Tylerstown, Wales in 1929 and died in 2013. I was born in New York City in 1998. When I was growing up, my grandmother Sybil was the center of my world. Sybil lived in a cottage in Sag Harbor, New York on Long Island, a small house that contained multitudes of Welsh paraphernalia. She had a map of Wales where in a large glass frame, she put little gold stars where everyone in her family was from, including my grandpa's side. When it came to Wales, Grandpa Richard was always included in the conversation. Because she was also so close with his siblings and larger family when they were married, she was an encyclopedia for the early part of not only her life, but his too. She always answered every question and never let her history with him get in front of my brother and I getting to know our grandfather in a personal way. She would explain to us how her and Grandpa Richard both grew up in the valleys in South Wales, very specifically, but each valley was very different. I would then turn to the map and see all the gold stars were kind of close together. How different could all these valleys be? There were a few aspects of Sybil and Richard's childhoods that didn't totally, wholly appeal to me as a Y2K little girl. I felt grateful that I didn't have to go to chapel every Sunday and that I didn't have to ration my food. But my grandma's experiences with both of these activities were largely positive. At chapel, she had many opportunities to sing, act, dance, and speak. Chapel was a place for her to be independent and express herself. Her commentary on rationing during World War II was a range of yes, sometimes it was hard, and her feeling like she was contributing to her family. She remarked once how rationing in her early teen years set her up for a good daily routine and a sense of responsibility for her community. Of course, to my 7-year-old ears, all I could think selfishly was imagine a world, a life without snacks. Sybil would also speak on how she felt specifically proud to be Welsh during the war. A train full of English children arriving in the Rhondda to escape the Germans bombing the major cities of the UK left a remarkable impact on her. Despite losing her mother at the age of 10 in 1939, she viewed this event as something that caused her to feel deeply, not only to have her dad and siblings, but to also not be separated from them. She marked this event as the beginning of her hatred for Hitler and the Nazis. She felt proud that her home region was being used to host child war refugees and angry that so many children were being separated from their families because of political violence. My first memories of Wales all consist in the context of my grandparents' siblings who still lived or worked here in Wales. My grandmother's brother, Alan, who worked at Cardiff University and lived in Bath, took my mom, my brother, and I on a tour of the Rhondda on a very hot, clear day. I remember standing on one of my grandma's childhood streets. It was the first time I had seen terraced houses on a full tilt going up the side of a hill. It looked out onto the valley, rolling trees and huge clouds. Alan then pointed to the boarded up rectangle on the side of the house. He explained that was the coal door. You would be able to take coal straight to the back of the house. Coal, coal, coal. Everyone kept bringing that up. Visiting Richard's younger brother, Graham, was always fun. His wife, Hilary, kept sweets at hand constantly, and Graham could dive into a Welsh hymn, full volume, at the drop of a hat. Richard's older sister, Cassie, lived in Porthcawl with her son, Philip. I don't have any memories of Cassie ever being taller than me. She would open the door to her house and exclaim, "Philip, turn on the lights in the front room, looks like the depths of hell in here." My mom would always suit me up in a Welsh rugby shirt when visiting relatives. I would ask Cassie if I could ride her medical chair up and down her stairs. I would swing my legs while I slowly moved past family photos on the opposite wall. I likely couldn't identify the majority of the subjects, but I could recognize parts of my mom's or grandpa's face in these black and white photographs. We were living in New York in the earliest time of my life. The oldest people around me, my grandma and her friends, were mostly women. Largely speaking, the men that seemed to come up the most in conversation were gone by the time I was born. My grandpa Rich would be brought up at dinner or in passing, but it was mostly two other men that were referenced heavily by Sybil and her friends, which were Jordan Christopher, my grandma's second husband, and Roddy McDowell. Someone named Rex came up sometimes too. Roddy McDowell was an incredible man who lived many lifetimes and accomplished many unique achievements. I would be remiss to be giving the Richard Burton lecture and not touch on Mr. Roddy McDowell, as he is a major through line not only in my grandpa's life, but also in Elizabeth and Sybil's lives. Besides being a fantastic actor, Roddy was also a prolific photographer and documented large swaths of his own life and therefore photographed large swaths of Hollywood history. Roddy was born in South London to Irish Scots parents. He started his career in show business as a baby model and began acting in films at age 9 after winning a theater prize. His prepubescent wins brought him to being cast in John Ford's How Green Was My Valley, playing a child coal miner. He would then be cast in Lassie at age 13. He would meet a 12-year-old Elizabeth Taylor. Her second credit, a supporting character in Lassie Come Home, would be the beginning of Roddy and Elizabeth's lifelong friendship. Sybil and Richard had known Roddy for some time when Roddy and Richard starred in the original production of Camelot on Broadway in 1960. Sybil and Roddy, by this point, were the best of friends, and they regularly socialized with people such as Bodie Boatwright, Lauren Bacall, Betty as we knew her, and Lee Remick, amongst many, many others. Soon after Camelot, Richard and Roddy would be cast together in a film, Cleopatra, with Roddy's childhood friend and international star Elizabeth Taylor. I'm not going to bore everyone with the details of what happened next, but what I do want to do is take this moment to thank Roddy for being a mainstay in our family, for being a brother to both Sybil and Elizabeth without ever causing strain, a paternal figure to my mom and her siblings when two families were becoming one. Roddy passed when I was 9 months old. Despite no memory of him, I am so grateful that we got to have a kutch in the late 90s. Roddy is and was a Hollywood legend, the final person mentioned at the 1999 Academy Awards in memoriam to give you an idea of how prolific he was. His queer iconography, his legendary house parties, and his ability to become everyone's best friend is truly iconic. I understood that both Grandpa and Elizabeth were famous, but I didn't think much more of it. I didn't understand the layers to their marriage and that their relationship by itself held such notoriety. When we lived in New York, everything was centered around theater. Besides school, I would say the place I spent the most time growing up was a theater. Grandpa's Hamlet on Broadway in 1964 was spoken about often, and the VCR of the production was a fixture on our sitting room shelf. So before our family moved to Los Angeles, I largely thought of Rich as a theater actor. The only exposure I had to Elizabeth's work for a long time was her appearance in the 1994 film adaptation of The Flintstones. You may have seen it. I met Elizabeth for the first time in the early 2000s at the Plaza Hotel. She taught me how to fold a paper airplane and let me play with her very sweet pooch, Sugar. I wanted to touch on my grandmother after my grandparents broke up. I'm currently working on a documentary, so you'll hear more about it another time. The thing that everyone can agree on is that Sybil never painted herself as the victim and used an incredibly humiliating situation to brand a new type of woman in the Western world. At the time, she was largely criticized for leaving my grandpa as it was seen to be more strong of a wife's position to stand by him throughout that time. Our family moved to Los Angeles in 2006, and it was a brave new world for me. To know me is to know how much I didn't like growing up there. I love to visit now, but coming from New York, it was such a culture shock. It was not until we moved to Los Angeles that I understood how famous Grandpa and Elizabeth were, especially Elizabeth in Los Angeles. Though through iconic murals like this, I started to put it all together. This mural is off Hollywood Boulevard and was famously immortalized in La La Land, amongst other projects. As you can see in the front row is Lauren Bacall, Humphrey Bogart, Marilyn Monroe, Charlie Chaplin, Lassie with Shirley Temple, and another gentleman who I don't know the name of.
W.C. Fields.
W.C. Fields, thank you everyone. James Dean, Elizabeth, and Grandpa. They also have many connections to other people in this mural, but I will say most specifically is that Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart saw Grandpa in a production in the UK, and they are the reason that he was cast in My Cousin Rachel, his first Hollywood movie in the 50s. When I was in high school in Los Angeles, cinema and frequenting local movie theaters became a lifeline and stability for me. I went to the ArcLight Theater, Los Feliz Theater, Laemmle, New Beverly Cinema, amongst many others. I fully believe going to the cinema so frequently is the way I am the way I am today, and wish every child to experience it often. Streaming is great, but with so many films, particularly Richard and Elizabeth's, they are meant to be seen on the big screen. I just want to speak specifically on our family and how supportive everyone has been. In this photo, you can see many stages of my grandma's life. There when she was a bit older, there in the 80s. My mom explained in her lecture a few years ago that we really exist in a truly blended family. The great director Christopher Columbus, who famously directed the first 2 Harry Potter movies, amongst many other things, credited Emma Watson, Daniel Radcliffe, and the gentleman, Rupert Grint, for being astronauts in their field of child acting. I feel very similarly about my mom and her siblings being astronauts of childhood paparazzi. I think it's very hard to estimate how, even in today's day and age, how invasive being photographed as a child is. And truly, my mom and her siblings were some of the first children to be photographed the way that they were. It's very hard to understand how much of a blueprint Grandpa was for Hollywood culture. In many ways, the original bad boy. I think that he produced an amazing self-image through his own legendary iconography, but also through his own insecurity and alcoholism. I'm here to say today that alcoholism should not be stigmatized, and it is an illness of the mind and not something that you choose to be. Billie Lourd, the brilliant actress who is the daughter of Carrie Fisher, said recently, remarking on her mom's death, "I miss her terribly, but sometimes I'm so mad at her because why didn't she take care of her body?" My brother and I would talk about this a lot when we were growing up, this complicated relationship that we had with our grandpa, where he was very iconic, very prolific, but then also was very complicated, and how we felt that in his legacy we couldn't really exist in our truth. As a matter of fact, I think that the context is actually the most interesting thing about Richard. Usually his alcoholism and his addiction is taken to a level of exploitation, when in reality, if you just do a small amount of research, you can quickly understand why he was the way that he was. He had many things taken away from him at a young age, including his mother's death at the age of 2. While I credit Mr. Philip Burton, my adoptive great-grandfather, with many things, I am remiss to think what would have happened if she hadn't died in 1927. Would the course of events be different? I am also the product of 2 Welsh great-grandmothers who passed due to low feminine hygiene at the time that was offered to them. My great-grandmother Mabel passed away after a failed abortion, after she had lost her 8-year-old son in a car crash in the Rhondda. And my other great-grandmother, Richard's mother, Edith, died of sepsis after giving birth to my great uncle Graham. I think that these two things are very significant, and as a 21st century feminist, I hold them very close to my heart. It's very hard to understand for me as someone that grew up in New York and Los Angeles, not having access to proper care, the idea that possibly both of these events took places in people's sitting rooms or dining rooms is something that I'm very grateful to not experience. And I think many cases that are similar are carried with much shame. And I am very grateful in terms of that history and the history of alcoholism on both sides of my family, that my parents have always been incredibly open with me about those struggles, and not hiding it from me or romanticizing it, or from my brother. These photos, I think, show how proud a family we are to come from so many different types of people and so many different marriages. But it's always been an honor for me to be a representative of the entire family. One of my first times doing that was at the Hollywood Star unveiling. I remember I skipped school. My best friend Nathaniel at the time asked me if I was gonna straighten my hair. And I didn't, clearly. And this was one of the first times that I really got to know my older cousin Eliza, as you can see there, and my younger cousin Richard. And I realized in that moment that we are full-blown first cousins, and that realization hadn't come to me before that day. Obviously, I'm with Mr. Michael Sheen too, which was very exciting. He had recently been in Twilight, so I had a lot of questions. My grandma Sib was an incredible woman who really took the time to not only hear me, but understand how I was moving through the world, especially as the child of a growing star, as she became in my childhood. It's very strange for me it's stranger for me then than now, but it was very weird to me to have this other figure that was so well known in our family when everyone in my school seemed to not know who Grandpa was, but wanted to know what was happening on the next episode of Grey's Anatomy, re my mother. So I really didn't understand Grandpa's fame largely. And I think that after Elizabeth and my grandma died within about a year of each other, I really started understanding the full breadth of our family, and also realizing that whatever extravagances that we had were also very normal. Everyone has a crazy uncle story. Everyone has a, oh God, that happened at the wedding. And it actually made me feel a bit more connected to myself and to my family. But as I kept researching, I realized the context of not only coming from Irish indentured servants on my dad's side, but Welsh coal miners. Learning more about the oppression that they faced throughout the 20th century, and most of my childhood memories have to do with someone saying, "Maggie Thatcher," in a very strong voice. I quickly was swayed one way, but it made me very connected to social movements and history in the UK. My grandma was very proudly from a communist village in the Rhondda. Even when she would have moments of saying, "Oh, Kate Middleton looks very pretty," she would stop herself and go, "I'm a Bolshie." And we go, "Okay, we believe you. Stop yelling at us." I am truly proud to be Welsh. I think it's like Grandpa's career, it's a true if you know, you know situation. What I love about talking about Grandpa's legacy in America specifically is that it's usually either owned by one group or the other. The first group being theater heads, film heads, people that soak up culture. And the second group, frankly, being gay guys. Because of Elizabeth's legacy, they go, "That was the one she was married to twice." I mean, yeah, for sure, that was her. That was him and her. I lived to be Welsh, and my grandma raised me that way. Even though my grandmother couldn't speak Welsh growing up in her section of the Rhondda, didn't. As I said before, her house was covered in Welsh paraphernalia, and she made it very clear that we knew who we were, and specifically from the valleys in the context of the coal mines. Grandpa's life is very interesting because it is bookmarked by two strikes. He was born in November of 1925, obviously the famous coal strikes in 1926, and then he died amidst the early days of the coal strikes, the infamous coal strikes in 1984. Finally speaking, here's a photo of my mom and I about a year and a half ago outside of South Bank, where they were showing The Motive in the Queue, a show about the rehearsal process of the 1964 production of Hamlet. I want to take this moment to thank my mom for leading me through many difficult, even today, many difficult aspects of this experience. But ultimately, I just want to say thank you so much to the Valleys and thank you so much to the community that has made this possible. My mom and I could have been completely hands-off with this entire process, and we know that something still amazing would have happened. But it is an even bigger honor to have been involved in everything, from the Burton 10K event to the Blue Plaques on Monday, to the brilliant team at the Richard Burton Archive for putting this event on every single year. For me to be standing here is incredibly surreal, not only because of my age, my connection to my grandfather, but also the fact that I am American. I know that there is a lot of sort of conversation and perception of Americans. I hope you know that I'm always educating Americans on Wales, making sure they know where it is, they know all the different landmarks, etc. And it is an honor for me to be here today. I want to take a moment to thank some specific people at Swansea University: Daniel Williams, Elaine Canning, and Matthew Hughes. And I want to take a very, very specific moment to shout out Sean Williams, who is truly the pillar of this whole process and is the one grinding every single day to make sure everything is perfect. At every single event, I have seen her with a presentation set up to exhibit Grandpa Rich's legacy, and for that, I'm truly so thankful. Love you, Sean. So that concludes the Richard Burton lecture. Thank you so much.
Charlotte has always had the incredible ability to amalgamate a lot of different ideas and thoughts and philosophies and histories and stories and put them all in context. And what is so exciting for me and for Michael Ritchie, my husband, is to be able to celebrate Data Centenary, which was, of course, on Monday, out-of-body experience for all of us, standing in Pontryagin Van with the blue plaques, and Ty Bach with the blue plaque for Philip Burton, my wonderful adoptive grandfather, who I always think of as my grandfather, by the way. And to be able to come together and really honor the legacy of my dad, Richard Burton. One of the great things that I loved about all the pictures you showed, Charlotte, was that particularly the one where they're at the unveiling of the Hollywood star, because that really covers a very wide swath of the family, because we are a blended family with Elizabeth Taylor's family. We have constant family reunions together, which we thoroughly enjoy. And one of the things about Elizabeth's children, in general, they're extremely private, and they have never been comfortable standing on stage. They would never be comfortable doing something like this. And in fact, at Elizabeth's memorial at Warner Brothers in 2011, they asked me to speak for them, which was a little bit shocking because I wasn't her child. But, and there was something, and basically what happened was I started to talk about what our childhood was. And one of the things that's been coming up a lot for me the last couple of days and has throughout life, as Charlotte says, we were all photographed so much as children. And we didn't really know what the heck was going on. We kind of took it for granted after a while. We got used to it. But it's always that thing with celebrity, which is public and private. It sits side by side, and there's the public part of our lives, and there's the private part of our lives. And the private part was very, very much as in any family, sometimes Dad shouting at me because he didn't want me to be an actor. That was a great moment. And he said, it's the only fight we've ever had. And I said, yeah. I said, I think there were a few others, but, but mostly, it's that thing of having to be in the public eye all the time. And I'm so glad you mentioned Billie Lourd, Carrie Fisher and Brian Lord's gorgeous, amazing daughter, who I happened to see the other day. And I told her and her dad that we were coming here to do this. And she gave me a huge big hug and became very emotional. And we remembered a time where myself, Liza Todd Burton Tivy, a dad's stepdaughter, but actually his daughter, and myself and Carrie, her mom, and Billy all were together for lunch. And Charlotte just today sent me the most incredible photograph of me, Liza Todd, and Carrie Fisher sitting together. And at one point, Carrie Fisher and I had a little moment of, wait a minute, who was the favorite stepdaughter of Elizabeth Taylor? I would like to figure that out right now. And so, we laughed, we laughed a lot, as one does. And I mean, my God, in this business, you have to laugh all the time. But it's very powerful to me to be here. I was here a few years ago doing my own lecture. I remember I did it for Charlotte. By the way, I had no idea what Charlotte was going to say today, so this was revelatory to me. And I'm so thrilled with everything you talked about because, these people who Charlotte mentioned, Roddy McDowell, Lauren Bacall, George C. Scott, Colleen Dewhurst, these were the titans. These were the titans of Dad's generation. And I grew up with them. They were my parents' friends. They were also hugely successful, Academy Award-winning actors. But the truth of it was they were my parents' friends. And that's the public and private that I'm talking about, that I'm mentioning to you today. And last year, was a blessed time for us because we had the wonderful Geraint Talvin Davis here. And we were so thrilled to be here for his lecture. And, this is the thing about family and history and, the stories. What are the stories that we're always telling? And the story that his wonderful son, Ed Talvin, decided to create with Mark Evans was Mr. Burton, which has been the most glorious film. We are so proud of this film. We are so thrilled to have you here today. To be continued, by the way. What I love now that's going to happen after this wonderful day and this terrific lecture is we are now going to move into a few other events that will happen in Wales. And I know there's a big gala in Port Talbot on Friday night. Mm-hmm. But we're also now going to move into a period where we're going to really be looking at Dad, the actor. And that will be a month-long retrospective at the British Film Institute in London.
In South Bank.
In South Bank. You will see a lot of Dad's movies that you well know, if indeed you can make your way or send your friends. You will also see movies you maybe didn't even know existed. And there's actually one extraordinary television film that's going to show that I never even knew of its existence. I had a long talk with the curator, Simon McCallum, the other day about the whole program over the month, and it's going to be really, really exciting. And that's the thing. At the end of the day, his life was huge. He made lots of great choices and some fascinating choices, let's just say, to be charitable. And and yet here we all are celebrating him and loving him. And at the end of the day, it all came from the fact that this young man was just a talent that just emerged, as I say, Athena out of the head of Zeus. I mean, literally emerged into the firmament and made his way from minute one. And it's extraordinary to see that. And because there's so many great films that exist of his, we are able to really cherish that. The other thing I want to mention is we have lots of conversation. Not only are we celebrating Dada in Wales, we're celebrating him in London. We're hopefully going to celebrate him in New York in a year and a half because we're hoping that The Motive in the Queue, the great Sam Mendes production with Johnny Flynn and Mark Gatiss, will come to Broadway as we call it. And constantly I am. This is the thing about being his child, being Charlotte's mother, Charlotte being his grandchild, Morgan being his grandchild. We're constantly having moments of connection with Dad, moments of history, moments of pathos, moments of sadness, moments of sweetness. Constantly in Hollywood, I go to a studio to do something on the screen, and the man who's sitting in the kiosk that lets you in, if he's an older man, he'll go, "I remember your father. He was always so nice to me." And that is what I hear over and over again from crews that have worked with him. He was such a gent. He was such a pleasure to work with. He was such a delight. this summer, I had the great experience of being, for my debut at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And I just want to say the lovely Jess Nestling is here from my production of The Constant Wife at the RSC. And I was constantly in Stratford. Both my parents were there, walking around, realizing little places they hadn't been. And I thought, man, they probably looked at these statues together when they were kids at the Royal Shakespeare Company, which is so beautifully rendered in Mr. Burton about when Dada first went to the RSC. So, and the great joy of my life, as you know, there is a pub called the Dirty Duck in Stratford, which my father frequented. I'm sure that's not surprising to you. And it's always been a great honor to have your photograph put up in the Dirty Duck, and there was Dad front and center. And the greatest joy of my life is that I am now sitting right next to him at the Dirty Duck. So it's very exciting for me. And these are the little things that we love. But the life of an actor is a very complicated one, and you never know what's going to happen one minute to the next. You never know for Dada, when he met Philip Burton, when Phil took him on and helped this young, bright boy to make his way into the world. Little did he know, little did the world know what was happening and what was going to happen and where it would go. So we've been very, very honored with all these beautiful projects about Dad. The National Museum of Wales did an extraordinary retrospective, The Motive in the Queue, as you've heard about. There's more to come, more relationships with hopefully the New York City Public Library of the Performing Arts. Well, that's in conversation. So lots of things are happening as we move forward. And this one, may I just take a moment to give the great shout out to my daughter. Charlotte Ritchie Burton. Charlotte Burton has done, sorry, Charlotte Ritchie, wherever you are. Charlotte Burton. She has done unbelievable work. And one of the greatest things that happened on Monday at the Miners' Arms, of course, where we celebrated Dada, was that, Griff, you mentioned to me that Charlotte has shown up at every meeting, has been there in Port Talbot, in Pontrydyfen, to celebrate and to work unbelievably hard on moving Dad's legacy into the 21st century. And we've been taught well by the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, because right after Elizabeth died in 2011, they set up a foundation that would continue her work with AIDS research, AIDS education, which has been a huge part of my life, and also just how do we protect the legacy? How do we protect her image, her voice? We are living in a world of artificial intelligence, so we're really being very, very protective at this archive. Where is she? There she is. And there he is, Daniel. Daniel. And, what are we doing to continue to tell the story of this amazing fellow, Richard Burton? So those are my comments today, and thank you so much. So actually, now we would like to ask anybody, if anybody has questions. I think, are we going to have some lights come up so we can see people? But if there are any questions that anybody has, we would love to field them.
So my question, Kate and Charlotte, and this has been amazing, by the way, right, is I'm fascinated by how your father and your grandfather, how he perceived America, because I worked in America after university, and if we go all the way back to, I think, A Time Remembered was his first play with Helen Hayes, and from then on, if I may say respectfully, he spoke in hyperbolic tones about America. Some were often derisory, some were congratulatory, and I don't think anybody ever really, in the public sphere, understood what he actually felt about New York and about that whole scene. So what I'm wondering is if he ever reflected to you in words that maybe weren't public, working class Welsh blokes aren't very good at expressing how they feel, right? Let's be honest.
Really? No.
It's not fashionable to enjoy things, if you're from Tybar. Unless it's a pint or a game of rugby. So, I just want to check it out there. How did he, let's cut through, how did he actually feel about New York? And just quickly as well, that kind of leads on to, Gabriel Byrne said recently in a New York Times article that the British film establishment were derided people like him and Peter O'Toole because they weren't of their ilk, and he was never recognised in the way that he should have been by the Academy, and that kind of thing. So, did he ever, I'll just say it. Did he ever express a regret that he didn't act more upon the stage, and he maybe chose money over what he thought, what people perceived to be some kind of faux artistic credibility on the stage?
For sure.
And that's it. Thank you.
It's a great question.
Yeah, no. Answer, no. I mean, the thing about, one of the things that Dad always used to talk about what he loved about New York, and you think of the New York that Dad went to in the 50s and 60s. That's where he went to do his plays there. And then he did some more towards the end of his life. But even, things had changed a bit. He loved the fact, he loved being on Broadway. He loved it. He loved being in British theater as well. I mean, he did all that work at the Old Vic. He did all the work at the RSC. I don't believe he ever did the West End, actually. But the times at the RSC and the Old Vic were right when he was starting to have a film career, nascent film career. And, hyperbole, you've read that wonderful word that describes my father to a certain degree, hyperbolic, of course, he's, and I think, he loved the fact that in New York, you could be walking down the street and you'd go to get a pack of cigarettes and a cup of coffee, and you're walking along and some construction worker would turn to you and go, "Hi, Mr. Burton." He loved that. He loved that there was no frou-frou, there was no fanfare, we don't want your autograph. It's "Hey, how you doing?" And that's very New York, I will say. And I think that's why some of his favorite actors, by the way, were actors like Robert Mitchum, who were not trained actors. Dada wasn't a trained actor. Technically. I mean, he trained on the stage in real time.
Yeah.
But he loved working with those American actors who had they were gritty. He so enjoyed working with them.
He probably felt in Britain still today, it's still a big conversation around, drama school and whether it's needed, whether it's not. Is it sort of an aristocracy that's out of date? And in just me, just sort of speaking as just a person that wasn't there, I feel like he probably felt more seen by that sort of type of actor and
yes.
And the sort of, off the street American thing that we have.
I've always thought that people like him, O'Toole, Richard Harris, when he should have won the Oscar for Virginia Woolf, it's absurd that he didn't. I think he actually liked being repelled by that kind of set.
Well,
that was kind of the rebel in him, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, honestly, the lack of the Oscar, the lack of the knighthood, et cetera, we've often talked about, especially recently, we like that.
We're happy with
it. We like that he doesn't have those things, because I've had so many people say to me, Sir Richard Burton, and I go, no, he's actually not, because... CBE.
That's as far as you go.
So, I actually, as an American and a modern person, I kind of am into the idea that he doesn't have these, classic accolades, because it proves that he's so iconic in his own standing. And
yeah. The other thing, too, was that the reason he didn't get the knighthood was because at those points, if you didn't live in the UK and he lived in Switzerland, he was domiciled in Switzerland, you could not get a knighthood. That just was
couldn't be, in the 70s, he couldn't be here for more than 90 days at a time or something.
Yeah.
Or 90 days in the whole year.
But that has changed.
That has changed.
As you may have noticed.
Yeah.
But the other thing, I actually talked about it today, getting nominated for an Oscar, getting nominated for one Oscar is an unbelievable achievement. Look at all the choices. My friend.
Which, can I say one thing? I would recommend to everyone, look at the nominations he was up against. I agree with you. But there are some other years where you're
what are you gonna do?
That was a tough year. Going through the nominations in the 50s through 70s is, you look at one category and you're all those movies came out in the same year. It's really crazy. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. Charlotte is a cinephile, as you can tell. She really knows what she's talking about. No, and I, being nominated for one Oscar is extraordinary. And he was nominated for his first Hollywood movie, which was My Cousin Rachel. And my mother was so funny. She said, well, yes. She said, I mean, we went to pick it up. We went to the Oscars and we're like, we're here to pick up the Oscar. Like, it's just going to happen. And I'm like, I mean, she said, we had no doubt. I mean, it was his first Hollywood movie. It was like, that's so hysterical. She said, and that was my mom's sort of attitude is, yes, they're going to give it to him. And, so that was first time, again, Dad, amazing. First time he does a Hollywood movie, he gets nominated for an Oscar. Then to get 6 other nominated, I mean, it's an unbelievable achievement. And the truth of it is, at the end of the day, Dad was very tenacious and strategic, as much as you can be as an actor, because it's really hard to be strategic and tenacious. You have to stay sort of keep your eye on the prize, whatever that prize is. And it can be great fame, great fortune, great acting, great roles. And he was very conscious of why he chose to do what he chose to do. Those years before Elizabeth, he was already nominated for 2 Academy Awards before he met Elizabeth. And my mother, so one time The Robe was on, which he was nominated for. And I said, oh, Mom, what's on the television on Turner Classic Movies in the United States? That's our old movie station. I said, it's The Robe. And she went, oh, The Robe. I have such sweet memories of The Robe. I love The Robe. What a sweet thing. I'm like, Mom, doesn't Dad kill Jesus Christ? I mean, is this like a sweet movie? I don't think so. He's not a good guy. Yeah. She said, oh, yes, but we had such a wonderful time. But that's what I'm talking about public-private, is that actually that was Mom's reminiscence of it, it was just such a lovely, delightful time, when we made that movie. But, the other thing too, and, this is mentioned certainly in places far and wide, but the other thing too is Mama and Dad were kept very much a group of people around them. My Uncle Ivor, my Auntie Gwen, my Uncle Ivor Glyn Jenkins, played for Neath. Okay, I'm just going to say that. That was always told to me by everybody. And they traveled with us. I mean, they were one of my elder uncles and aunts, and they were huge in my life in terms of being with when I was born, when my sister Jessica was born. They were around. They were around with us all the time to help, to be a part of the family, to create a community, so that when they were in all these far-flung places like Libya and Spain and making all these, movies on, Morgan, when he was a little boy, said, Grandpa sure has done a lot of castle-ish movies. I said, yes, that's true. But though, they were all in this exotic location, so it was creating that little community that he could take with him everywhere, including New York. When Dada went to do Camelot, Uncle Ivor and Auntie Gwen came. We were all living on Central Park West, close to where we are now. And, that was just, it was understood that they were always going to be with us. So it's an interesting thing, because the life of an actor is an odd life. It's an odd life. We do a lot that is public. Obviously, we're performing.
Especially for a man.
Especially for a man. That's true.
Others, yeah.
That is true. And especially in those years. But there's a lot of time where you spend by yourself, learning lines, going over, what am I doing now? Okay, I'm playing this scene today, okay. And I do a lot of theater still. I've always kept theater in my life. Dada didn't do as much in certain chunks of his life. So it is a solitary life. There's a lot of alone time where you're just pounding, getting those lines into your head, trying to figure out who the character is, trying to figure out what the story is. If it's an old play, if it's a Shakespeare play, how do you make your way into that language? One thing that Mama always said about Dad and his amazing ability with Shakespeare, I mean, the poetry, Shakespeare, Dylan Thomas, is that because he did speak Welsh, that was his first language, she said he approached the verse, he approached the poetry, he approached Shakespeare with an alien care. And I loved that idea, and it really resonated to me when I was in Ireland for a long time doing a beautiful play called The Beauty Queen of Leenane. And because
By Martin McDonagh.
By Martin McDonagh.
Yes.
legend. And that was, I sort of had I knew what it was to be a Celt, but there was something that, and it's really happened to me in my time in Wales, but it really also happened to me in Ireland, where I went, oh my God, that's what it is to be a Celtic actor. Even though I'm American, I feel like that is so on me as an actor, whatever I do, whatever kind of play or movie or television show I do.
And I will say, in regards to your initial question, my mom and I, we watched this amazing documentary, I don't know if any of you have seen it, called Tea with the Dames. And it's Joan Plowright, Eileen Atkins, Maggie Smith, and Judi Dench. Let's just give a round of applause.
Listen, we love them.
Lost 2 of them very recently, legends. But after the documentary, they talk obviously so much about their theater careers, Shakespeare, whether it was on TV or on stage. And Mom and I both afterwards were like, if Grandpa could have done more theater in the UK specifically, who knows? Who knows if that would have changed his direction. And also, just being totally frank, speaking generally, some of his choices in the 70s and 80s in terms of films that he took were not amazing, and it was because of financial reasons, which is still very much a big thing today. Obviously, being with Elizabeth, he had to keep a pretty big budget. But yeah, I think, he for a long time was very strategic, but then he also reached a point where he had to make financial decisions, and that's also a huge part of being an actor. I think while I think it's very fair when, people criticize in today's terms, people criticize actors for, working with a controversial director, producer, writer, while I completely understand that backlash, I want everyone in this room to understand is that even if you're Richard Burton, even if you're a major actor, in terms of the totem pole of a production set or a stage production, you're at the bottom, no matter what the situation is. You are, referring to other people. And, acting, no matter what, is still a job, even if it has, glamour attached to it or whatever. So, yeah, definitely there were moments where he made more financial decisions than artistic ones.
And also, I can't believe I forgot to mention this because I've been talking about it endlessly. The legacy, the influence of Dad through Wales for young Welsh actors making their way into the firmament. I mean, most notably our two people who've virtually become members of our family, Michael Sheen and Matthew Rhys. They are literally now, they should just be in the family. It's enough already, as they say in America.
We can go to the next question.
Yes,
please.
next question.
Could I ask, you started touching on my question actually straight away. One of my most indelible memories is of hearing Richard Burton performing, speaking in Under Milkwood. And you started mentioning the Celtic connection about the voices and words. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us more about that? Because the way he performs it is so visceral, dark, it's Celtic, it's incredible. And could you just tell me a bit more? Because I understand, that he had this incredible love of words, obviously. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
I can, actually, and the only reason I can is because I just did a project with Matthew Rhys about Dylan Thomas, which we're hoping to bring to Wales, by the way. And I happened to just be randomly doing some research about the recording. Of course, I'd heard the recording, and for what it's worth, my mother is in it as well.
The original.
Playing in the original recording. Are you talking about the film, or are you talking about the recording? So Mama is in it. She plays Mrs. Organ Morgan and Myfanwy Price. And then Philip Burton is in it, and he is the Reverend Eli Jenkins. So there you go, family affair. Rachel Roberts, the great Rachel Roberts. Woo, woo. One of my mother's best friends, by the way. She's in it. Oh, God, she's so funny. And brilliant, brilliant actress. Anyway, so I read an incredible thing, which I'd never known. That when they were making the recording of Under Milkwood, they'd had somebody else had stepped. Dada couldn't make it to the first rehearsal because he had another obligation. And so they had somebody else do it. And the director had said, oh, you know what, we'd like you to just do the first voice in an English accent. Just an English accent, like plain English accent. And, whoever was stepping in for Dad did that. And then Dada came in and they rehearsed for the second rehearsal was with Dad. And Dada, they said, please do it in an English accent. So he did it in an English accent. It was quite clear to the fellow who had stepped in for him earlier in the day that Dad really hadn't spent a lot of time with the material. Which is sort of not a shocking story to me, because this is sometimes an actor thing. It's like last minute, okay, we're doing it, and now it's all happening. And so Dad, there was a break, there was like a dinner break, and then they were going to make the recording. And apparently, according to this fellow, in the dinner break, Dad didn't go to dinner. He sat there with a cup of tea, and he went through the whole thing again, and he was going over it and going over the lines and, really getting it into his mouth, because it's hard to do things right off the cuff, especially if it's being recorded for posterity. And anyway, he came back, and he did it in a full Welsh accent. And so, there you go. And I read that, and I had never read that before. And I thought, oh my God, that makes so much sense to me. And of course, as you know, it is one of the most iconic recordings of anything ever.
Of anything ever, yeah.
And so there he is, again, that guy, just emerges fully grown, one day of work, and there he is doing one of the greatest recordings you'll ever hear. So it's an incredible recording. So anyway, that's what I know. But thank you for that question.
Thank you so much.
Great.
To the woman in white.
The woman in white.
Hello.
Hiya. Oh, you're ready to go.
Yeah, I am.
You're
Yeah,
ready.
just echoing this previous sentiments as well about thank you for being here and for such a fantastic lecture tonight. So obviously you talked a little bit, both of you, about the public-private, and clearly Richard Burton kind of grew up and became a star, before the age of social media and celebrity branding.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious how you think he might have navigated kind of that public image and social media if he had been working today.
Literally. That's a really, really good question, and I think about it often. There's really not many 21st century examples of people. I always think that Tom Hardy and Cillian Murphy's friendship and their working relationship is very reminiscent of Grandpa with Peter O'Toole, or a lot of his other friends, and they kind of remind me, Tom Hardy's English, but he has Celtic background. Obviously, Cillian is Southern Irish, and so yeah, I try. It's hard because so many people have fed into my brain. They don't make them like that anymore, et cetera, et cetera. But I do see some comparisons in modern actors. The only one of the Instagram kind of age that I can really think of is Jack O'Connell. His story is very kind of reminiscent of Grandpa to me. He was street casting for the show Skins on E4. I don't know if many people in this room watched that, but I certainly did. Yeah, I think, going through his diaries, which brilliantly there's a Twitter account called Burton Diaries, and on the date corresponding with a diary entry, he'll tweet just a diary entry for that day. And there are often things where you're like, wow, glad Grandpa wrote this down in a diary and didn't have Twitter. But yeah, I think largely speaking, obviously I don't know Grandpa firsthand, but from my cousins on Elizabeth's side, I've heard so much about, that none of them would have felt comfortable taking a photo with their grandma, not because of any sort of dynamic between them, but just this idea that they didn't want to bother her. She's so used to being photographed, she's so used to not trusting people with a camera that they don't want to put her in that position. So largely speaking, my cousins, don't have so many photographs with her, which I think is really interesting. So yeah, I think it would have been kind of a balance of him being, I feel like he would have been kind of like a Pete Davidson type, where he would post a lot, maybe be going through something that maybe we should all know about, and then delete his account. You know what I mean? I think it probably would have been that type of vibe. Yeah. But I'm sure, yeah, I think that he, it was like a very intense mix of, really being into his, as I mentioned before, his sort of ethos and his personality, and then in the sense of at the time, things, being a male actor was difficult in the sense of a man pursuing something artistic, and all of his brothers being coal miners and him being the first one to not go into the mine, I think really did have an impact on him for a long time. So that all being said, I bring that up to say that I think he had a really, I mean, I don't think this is news to anyone, but he had a really complicated relationship with fame. I think sometimes he loved it, sometimes he hated it. And I think social media would have exacerbated that sort of dichotomy that he had within himself. I think, but also that all being said, he would have been very funny. I think he would have had very interesting takes. He was very political, obviously. My brother and I have a favorite clip. He was shooting a movie in Alabama. I think it was a movie that he made with O.J. Simpson. And he was being interviewed, and they were asking him about this and that, political things. And I think he had broken up with Elizabeth the second time at this point. And he's in like a gorgeous suit, smoking a cigarette, and he states in 1970, whatever, I'm a communist. And it's like, okay, so you've owned a yacht, you've owned a bunch of different properties across the world. But he really did believe that. So I think he would have had bananas takes that he would have put on Twitter and everyone would have giggled. And he would have been into it too. I really like that question. I've thought about it a lot, to be honest with you. Yeah. Thank you. I love that question.
That's a great question.
One more question, please.
Any other question?
I just wondered, when you go back to America, and this is probably a somewhat light-hearted question, I wondered what Welshisms you may take back to America or that you may use within your when you're together.
Charlotte has lived here for over a year, so it's an interesting thing. She goes back to America from time to time.
Yes, I would definitely say Kutch a lot. That's very popular. Yeah, I mean, I think with my grandma Sib, who obviously I knew well, it was more of like her attitude towards the world that was very Welsh. I think a classic example is like she would be indicating to turn a certain way and a person wouldn't be letting her go. And then they would finally let her go and she'd go, thank you. And then after she would turn, she would go, twit. And that was like very Welsh to me, she, because of rationing, she only really drank cold tea. She didn't like hot tea because the cold tea was more, familiar and comforting to her. Big mugs and, all that sort of thing. But that was a really, interesting part of our family dynamic and obviously something that many people can relate to and hear and understand the context, being in Wales. And my mom mentioned it at her lecture 2 years ago. My grandma didn't speak Welsh growing up. And on top of that, my grandma's father was an under manager at the mine and not a miner. And that was something that came up a lot in my grandparents' relationship. This sort of, they were both working class ultimately, but this idea that my grandma's dad was an under manager at the mine as opposed to just a miner made him posh. So yeah, I mean, I think it was really more, I mean, there was phrases for sure and little things, and her house was covered in Welsh.
Oh my God.
She had a TMI, but had this kind of, what's the word? Just kind of like a cloth sort of
Tea towel.
tea towel?
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it was a tea towel, but it was vocab in Welsh, and it was next to the toilet. So when I was being potty trained, I would look at this, and I would be like, why does that, does that vowel sound like that? My grandma would say no, and my Uncle Graham on my grandpa's side, by the time my brother and I knew him, he was pretty blind. But he would take us into his sitting room, and he had the Welsh alphabet on the wall, and he would start to read it out and try to give an example of a word for each letter. But then because he was blind, halfway through, he would forget the alphabet. And so my brother and I would just be standing there totally, I'm loving it. But yeah, I mean, I think more just in terms of, for me, it was cadence and attitude. That really where her Welshness came through. Amazing host, very tidy, very organized, on time. Yeah, that's sort of, this is more of a British thing than a Welsh thing, but yeah, polite on the surface, feeling something else underneath. Which as a New Yorker, we are the opposite. So it was always kind of hard to balance that out with her. But my grandma said was super Welsh, loved being Welsh. Had a magnet on her fridge, you can take the girl out of Wales, you can't take the Wales out of the girl, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah. Thank you.